such a trippy thing. Hello birdies, hello spring. Each day on earth is a day that's worth remembering.
All right, folks, that was a bit of a song called Life's a Trippy Thing. And it was originally recorded by Nancy Sinatra and Frank Sinatra. I think it went out as a B-side of a single by Nancy Sinatra. But I'm not sure because it shows up on compilations of Nancy Sinatra and compilations of Frank Sinatra, so who knows. But I just discovered it recently, and I loved it, and I talked my wife into working on a recording and a video of it with me, and you should watch it because it was fun, and you'll like it. So today in, I don't know, maybe kind of celebration of Pride Month, I don't know. It's only vaguely associated with Pride, but let's talk about the Pandakas. Because this is a subject that's kind of interested me for a long time, and I'd forgotten about it for years. When I was writing my book, what was it called? Sex, Sin, and Zen, I did some research on the phenomenon of the Pandaka, and maybe it's in the book. I'm not sure. I don't even remember if I put it in the book, but I do remember doing research about it. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then lately I started thinking about it, and I did some research again. So the Pandaka is a person who was forbidden to ordain as a Buddhist. So the scuttlebutt out there on the internet sometimes is that Pandaka means homosexual. Pandaka does not mean homosexual, not quite. But let's talk about what it does mean, because it's kind of interesting. Here is a selection from the Vinayas, which is a collection of rules for Buddhist monks. And all of the original rules for the original Buddhist monks were developed because some kind of problem occurred in the Sangha, in the little group of Buddhist monks that were originally formed around the Buddha. And then the monks asked the Buddha, how do we solve this problem? And the Buddha told them, and then these became enshrined as rules for Buddhist conduct. But what you have to remember is the Buddha didn't start out with these rules. He didn't start out with any rules. As far as anybody can determine historically, he when he first set up the Buddhist monastic order, it was just like, here, come on, let's try and do this thing. And it was sort of a trial and error process that developed the Buddhist order, and one of the things was problems arose, and Buddha would say, solve the problems. So here is one of the problems that arose. Okay, here's the story. And I found this on the internet, so the internet is always a little suspicious, but I went around and checked, and I found maybe 3 or 4 different places where the same story was repeated. I assume, these days you never know, but I think that probably is a reason to think that it's legit, that it comes from some legit source and wasn't just made up by somebody on the internet, but who knows. But actually I have come across this before the internet even happened. I came across a version of this story, so I'm going to say it's legit, but the version I'm reading comes from the internet, so who knows how, they might have screwed with the wording or whatever. But here goes the story. At one time, a certain Pandaka had gone forth as a monk. He went to the young monks and he said, "Come, venerables, do me." It doesn't say do me, but I don't want to get problems with YouTube. He says, do the deed with me. The monks dismissed him, saying, "Go away, Pandaka, we don't want you." He went to the big fat novices, the Pandaka did, said the same thing, and he got the same response. He then went to the elephant keepers and the horse keepers, and once again said the same thing, and they did it with him. Then they, the elephant keepers and the horse keepers, complained and criticized him. He said, these Shakyan monastics, the original Buddhist monastics, they didn't even have the name Buddhist monks in those days. These Shakyan monastics, these Shakyan monastics, Shakyan meaning Shakya Munis, monastics are Pandakas. And those who are not do the deed with them. None of them is celibate, because the monks were supposed to be celibate. The monks heard their complaints and told the Buddha. So this is one of the problems that arose within the Sangha, and they're telling the Buddha. And the Buddha said, a Pandaka shouldn't be given the full ordination. If it has been given, they should be expelled. So we assume from this story that the Buddha had heard the word Pandaka before and he knew what it meant. However, the meaning, the exact precise meaning of Pandaka is sort of lost to us in history. And the reason I say that it doesn't mean homosexual is because the term homosexual, we actually know where that originated. It originated, I believe the year was 1868. It was in the late 19th century, and it was a German publication, and I've forgotten the name of the woman who came up with it. Maybe somebody out there in internet land knows. But it was a specific person came up with the term homosexual. And that begat the concept of what a homosexual is. So before that, of course, there were men who only did it with other men and women who only did it with other men, or women, sorry. And that has been going on, I'm sure, since humans first existed. But there wasn't this concept of a category of human being called a homosexual until then. So the Buddhists, there's literature in East Asia that goes back a long time describing people doing that stuff with each other. But there isn't this category of person called a homosexual. So that is a modern invention. Now, according to a couple of places on the internet, here is what a Pandaka is. So this is the best guess of people who've studied this stuff. This is, let's see, the PTS dictionary. Definition is repeated in the Monier-Williams. So I know the Monier-Williams Sanskrit dictionary because that's the one my teacher often referred to. I don't know what PTS is, but I guess they both use this definition, and the definition is: Pandakas are great adherents to the pleasures of the world, rife with defilement, burning with desire, and without gender. It should be understood as just a way of saying that all of them are evil. So this is not, again, a definition invented by the Buddha. This is a definition that comes from a Sanskrit dictionary, and I guess the source of it is from the 6th or 9th century CE, some document called the Mahanidesa. I don't know what it is, but it's a traditional commentary on Buddhist literature, Buddhist stuff. Here's another one from another commentary. It doesn't say when this commentary was written, but it's a Vinaya from the Vinaya commentary by Buddhaghosa. They overcome with force of their burning sexual desire anyone who they desire to become friends together with. I guess that means they're just way too into sex. And another definition, which also comes from a Vinaya commentary and is apparently attributed to a Theravada bhikkhu, so just a Theravada monk. It doesn't really say who. But I've seen this in a couple of places on the internet. A man who finds nasty fulfillment in performing oral duties on another man. Number 2, a voyeur, a man who finds fulfillment in watching other people do the stuff. A eunuch, a half-time Pandaka, which is one who's only a Pandaka during the waning moon. Who knows what that means. And a neuter, a person born without those organs. So you can see the definition is kind of murky. And what I get out of all of that, my own, put it in my brain and slosh it around for a while and see what comes out, version of that is a Pandaka is somebody who's basically obsessed with sex. And somebody who's obsessed with sex is not gonna do well in an order of celibate mendicants, celibate monks, or celibate nuns, because it's pretty obvious why. I don't think I need to spell out why that's going to be a problem to have in a group of celibate monks and celibate nuns. But so it's important to understand that there wasn't this concept of a homosexual, somebody who identifies as that, to use the way the kids talk about things these days. There wasn't that. It was just somebody who had a tendency to get too involved in this stuff and be sort of obsessed with it and make it their identity, or make their whole life revolve around doing the deed. I don't know, I'll probably get struck by YouTube anyway for all the words I've used already on this, so maybe there's no point in censoring myself, but I'll just continue because it's fun. But anyway, it's somebody who's kind of obsessed with that stuff, and it's somebody who's got a problem. This doesn't mean that the person is forever and always. This is why I'm pointing out this idea of not identifying as this thing, as saying that I am this thing, and this is what I am, and blah, blah, blah. So Buddhism is, unlike Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, doesn't have any specific prohibitions against gayness, against whatever sort of kind of fun in the bedroom you want to engage in, is kind of outside, is considered sort of outside and not something that we need to concern ourselves with. Because in the original Buddhist monastic order, everybody was supposed to be celibate. So whether you came into the Buddhist order after only exclusively doing the deed with one gender, or doing the deed with the other gender, or doing the deed with both genders, or whatever, what have you, whatever you came from, you're supposed to leave all that behind, not do it anymore, done. So it doesn't matter. So there is no prohibition against a homosexual being ordained in the Buddhist order, in the modern sense of the term. Nowadays, most Buddhist orders derived from Japan don't carry out the celibacy thing. Buddhist orders in other countries do, but my understanding, and I'm sure somebody in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that it applies to you when you are a monk. And my understanding of how it works in countries outside of Asia is there are people who become monks for their whole lives. But there are also people who enter the monastic order, do it for a while, and then leave. So it's not necessarily a lifelong commitment, even in those places. It's a commitment to during the time that you are a monk. It's the same as with Catholic monks, I'm sure. If you stop being a Catholic monk or a Catholic nun, none of those restrictions apply to you anymore. In Japanese-style Buddhism, what the tendency to do is to follow the most sort of strict version, maybe it's changed, over the years, but a version of the strict version of the Buddhist sort of rules of conduct while you are in training. So what typically happens in a Japanese sort of setting is that you go through a training period. You'll go to a heiji or some other training monastery to train as... See, this is where it gets murky, because it's a priest and monk there's no distinction between those two. So in this case, we'd probably say more like a priest. So when you are in training, you follow all those rules. So again, doesn't matter what your preferences are, what your inclinations are. Before you get into it, you put all of it aside. You don't do it anymore. Then when you're out, this is where the Japanese order is different. The Japanese derived Buddhist orders are different. You're still a monk. You're still a bozu, to use the Japanese term, which is kind of a monk, kind of a priest. And you can run a temple and you can do all of those things, but you aren't necessarily bound by the strict monastic rules anymore. You're kind of on your own to figure it out, which means Buddhist monks in Japan typically marry and raise families and do all that stuff. Interestingly enough, and you probably have to ask a Japanese Buddhist nun or a Buddhist nun in a Japanese order about why this is, but the tendency is that the male monastics in Japan will go off and marry and have families after they go through their training. The female monastics in Japan tend not to. Although, as far as I understand, there's no rule preventing them. But it's sort of, this is the kind of way a lot of things are in Japan. There's no rule about it, but there's a strong custom. And people kind of tend to adhere to these customs as if they were rules, even though there's not specifically a rule. Again, feel free to correct me in the comments if I got this wrong, because it's not my strong suit to know what Japanese Buddhist nuns, female Buddhist monastics do. So sorry. Don't know about all that. But the point I'm trying to make is there isn't a restriction in Buddhism against a gay man or gay woman or bisexual man or bisexual woman or whatever, blah, 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 the whole alphabet, ordaining as a monk or a nun, whatever word you prefer to use. But there is this idea that when you are in training, you put all that aside, and then afterwards, you do what you do. But there is, however, the third Buddhist precept. And the third Buddhist precept is usually given as do not misuse sexuality. So it's kind of a wide field, and it is deliberately vague. I did a whole video, I've probably done more than one, but I know that about 3 years ago, possibly around then, I did an entire video describing, in which I read off all the different variations of what this don't misuse sexuality is translated as. And if you don't want to go back and look at that, and if you want to make sure I get paid, you can get my book, The Other Side of Nothing, in which there's a chapter about this. And there's several different understandings of of what do not misuse sexuality means. Some people take it to mean be celibate. My teacher, my first Zen teacher, the American one, once told me that he sometimes thinks that the best way to avoid misusing sexuality is just to do it. Because there's some people that just get so obsessive and so weird, and celibacy gets to be such a hassle for them, and they just can't deal with it, that they might as well just go and do the deed and get it over with, instead of just getting going crazy about it. But the general understanding is that it's up to the individual to look at his or her own conduct and try to determine and be careful about determining whether this is a misuse of sexuality or not. And anybody who is ever past puberty can tell you that that's not always easy to do. But you do the best you can, and that's the idea of that. So there you go. That's my little video about pandakas. I just thought it was an interesting subject, and maybe possibly timely for this particular month, where it's all rainbows everywhere and people are thinking about that kind of thing. Okay. If you want to donate to me doing more videos like this, where I just confuse you about ancient Buddhist stuff, you can go to the links that you are seeing in the description, the YouTube description right below this video. That will tell you how to get to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Or if you don't like that, here is a URL that you can go to. It's called it is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is another place you will find my PayPal and Patreon links, and those are my main ways of making a living. And I appreciate your support as always, but you don't have to donate to me if you don't want to. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time, and remember, life is a trippy thing. Does not feel like doing a cameo today. I don't know why. Anyway, we'll see you later, Ziggy. Bye bye. Let's go inside and